I was at a record fair in Memphis 2 years ago, sorting through a crate of the 90s country CDs, when the guy running the booth picked up a copy of the Chris Gaines album and laughed. He said something I have heard variations of for 25 years now. He called it the moment Garth Brooks, the man who made Friends in Low Places and The Dance, the biggest selling solo artist in American country music history, lost his mind. That framing has hardened into received wisdom. Garth, the dutiful country golden boy, made one strange creative detour with a soul rock alter ego. The fans rejected it, and he retreated into early retirement, humiliated by his own bad idea. It is the kind of story that fits on a podcast clip. It is also wrong in almost every important detail. Between 1996 and 2001, Garth Brooks ran what was, by the documented evidence, the most disciplined leverage campaign any country music artist had ever waged on a major record label. Capitol Nashville's president's seat changed hands 3 times in roughly 5 years. 2 album release dates moved by more than a year. A side project that the trade press initially called a creative folly turned out to fulfill specific contractual obligations on terms that benefited the artist. And the man at the center of it kept the public story so clean that 25 years later you can still find people calling him the victim of his own bad ideas. What looks like erratic behavior in a recording artist almost never is. The public sees albums, tours, interviews, music videos. The actual machinery, distribution agreements, marketing minimums, cross-collateralization clauses, master's reversion language, runs underneath all of it. When an artist does something that does not make sense from the outside, the answer is usually that you are looking at the wrong document. With Garth and Capitol between 1995 and 2001, the documents tell a different story than the conventional one. The foundation was laid earlier than most retellings acknowledge. In 1992, with No Fences certified at 10 million units, one of his 9 diamond-certified albums, a number that exceeds even the Beatles' 6, and Rope in the Wind certified at 9 million and still climbing, Garth began publicly objecting to a standard industry practice called free goods. Free goods were promotional copies, records the label gave away to radio stations, retailers, and reviewers that came out of the artist's royalty pool. The industry standard at the time deducted roughly 15% of pressed units before any royalties were calculated. On an album selling 14 million copies, that arithmetic erased royalty payments on roughly 2 million units. He took the dispute public in interviews with Billboard and Country Music magazine. He threatened to withhold tour support, and more importantly, threatened to slow walk delivery of his next album. Capitol settled the dispute quietly. The new arrangement reduced the free goods deduction on his contract specifically. Industry trade reports of the period suggested he secured a royalty rate higher than any country artist had previously received. The exact number was never published. What matters is what the dispute taught him. He had learned that a single artist generating a quarter of a major label division's revenue could rewrite the standard contract by threatening delivery. The leverage worked because Capitol Nashville could not afford to call the bluff. He never forgot which lever moved which gear. All of those albums had been produced by Alan Reynolds, who had worked with Brooks since his debut record and whose production credit ran through every Capitol Nashville release in the catalog. Reynolds' role matters here because the artist-producer relationship was the one stable relationship in Brooks' professional world during the entire period. While Capitol Nashville cycled through executives, Reynolds was the constant. His presence on each project gave Capitol just enough creative stability to keep hoping the next album would arrive on schedule. The next test came in 1995. Walmart had begun pricing single-disc CDs as low as $9.98 on certain titles, using top-tier music as loss leaders. Garth saw this as devaluing the catalog he was about to expand. He pulled his albums from Walmart for a stretch of late 1995 and demanded that Capitol enforce minimum advertised pricing across his distribution. Capitol's parent company, EMI, was reluctant. Walmart at the time accounted for roughly 15% of all recorded music sold in the United States. Refusing to play their game meant losing real revenue. He won. Capitol enforced his pricing terms. The boycott ended within months. And then he made the move that defined the rest of the decade. In 1996, his next album, eventually titled Sevens, was finished and ready for release. The release date came and went. Sevens did not appear in stores. It did not appear in 1996 at all. It did not appear in the first half of 1997 either. The album was finally released in November of 1997, more than a year after its originally slated date. Trade reports of the period attributed the delay to a dispute over marketing commitments, retail distribution guarantees, and a contractual restructuring that the artist was insisting on before the album could ship. The financial cost of that delay was not borne by him. He was, at that point, the highest-paid recording artist in country music. The cost was borne by Capitol Nashville, whose quarterly revenue projections collapsed twice in 18 months because the album it was depending on for fiscal year results did not exist. EMI's stock took measurable hits on each missed quarter. Trade reports tied the delay directly to leverage negotiation, not to creative dissatisfaction. He held delivery hostage until the contract terms changed. Capitol Nashville cycled through 3 division presidents. Jimmy Bowen, who had signed Garth originally and managed the relationship through the early hits, left the presidency in 1994, officially for health reasons. Scott Hendricks took over in 1995, was the working executive when Sevens was supposed to ship, and was replaced in early 1997. Pat Quigley was installed mid-1997. The trade press during his appointment described him in nearly identical phrasing across multiple publications as the executive who could finally work with Garth. What the framing made clear was that the relationship had been the problem. Hendricks had a different vision for how to develop the Capitol Nashville roster, one that involved investing in the next wave of country acts and reducing the label's dependence on a single artist. By the end of his tenure, that vision had been replaced by a roster strategy organized almost entirely around when Garth's next product would ship. Trade reporting from the period made clear that Hendricks's departure was not a voluntary career move. Within 4 months of his replacement, Sevens had a release date, a marketing budget that reportedly exceeded $20 million, and a retail distribution plan that fulfilled the artist's specific demands. The president who could not move the project was gone. The president who could was in place. The album that had been held back for over a year arrived in stores. 3 weeks after release, Sevens debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and topped the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart, selling approximately 896,000 copies in its first week. This is where the conventional reading of Garth Brooks's late 90s most badly falls apart. The standard story about Chris Gaines is that he was a creative misfire, a vanity project that nobody wanted, executed at a moment when Garth should have been delivering another country album. The album, released in September of 1999, sold 2 million units in the United States and was RIAA certified double platinum. By Garth's own standards, that was a catastrophe. By any other country artist's standards, that would have been a career-defining year. The conventional story does not address the contract question. Chris Gaines was not a sidebar to Garth's deal with Capitol. Capitol Nashville received the album as a deliverable. It was credited against his contractual album delivery requirement. The recording costs were carried on Capitol's books, not his. The marketing campaign, which included a feature-length film concept called The Lamb, a Paramount Pictures production that ultimately never reached theaters, a full-hour VH1 behind-the-music mockumentary, an extensive prosthetics and styling budget, and a national press tour conducted in character, was funded by the label. And the project occupied roughly 18 months of Capitol's calendar, during which the division could not commission, market, or release a traditional Garth Brooks country album. If you have ever watched an artist do something that did not seem to add up creatively, ask what the contract said. The contract usually adds up even when the music does not. The trade press analysis at the time treated Chris Gaines as a creative experiment. The financial analysis, if you do it now with the album's sales numbers and the marketing expenditures publicly available, treats it as something else. Capitol spent its highest single artist marketing budget of $19.99 on a project that fulfilled one album cycle of contractual obligation without delivering the country product the label actually needed. The next country album, Scarecrow, did not appear until 2001. By the time Scarecrow shipped, Garth had announced his retirement from active touring and recording. The structural question is why Capitol kept tolerating any of this. The answer is in the revenue concentration. By the late 1990s, Capitol Nashville's total annual revenue was somewhere between 40 and 55% dependent on Garth Brooks' album sales and back catalog royalties, according to industry analyst estimates published in Billboard at the time. Losing him would not have meant losing one artist. It would have meant restructuring the entire division, laying off staff, and absorbing a parent company write-down that the leadership of EMI in London was not willing to take. That dependency was the trap. The label could not fight the artist who was generating half its revenue. Every refusal to negotiate raised the probability of him walking, which would have been existentially expensive. Every concession reinforced the dynamic that made the next concession harder to refuse. The trade press never described it in those terms. Industry coverage framed Capitol's accommodations as standard artist relations. The accounting framed them differently. Between 1995 and 2001, Garth Brooks's contractual royalty rate was renegotiated upward at least twice. His free goods deduction was effectively eliminated. His marketing minimums were guaranteed in writing. His master's reversion timeline was reportedly shortened from the industry standard of 30 years or more to something significantly shorter, though the exact figure has never been published. The retirement announcement, when it came in 2001, was the cleanest move in the entire campaign. Garth announced that he was stepping back from recording and touring to raise his daughters. The framing was personal, sympathetic, and unimpeachable. Capitol Nashville's official response was supportive and grateful. There was no public dispute about the terms of his departure. There was no public dispute about anything. What the public didn't see, what only surfaced years later in industry retrospectives and in his own subsequent renegotiations when he returned to active recording in 2014, was that the retirement coincided with the expiration of specific contract obligations. By stepping away when he did, he avoided delivering additional albums under the original deal structure. When he returned in 2014, he did so on entirely new terms, signing with Sony Music Nashville, with a different distribution arrangement, his own label imprint, and ownership control over the catalog he'd built. The retirement wasn't a withdrawal. It was the final move in a renegotiation that had been running for nearly a decade. By any measure that matters in the recording industry, whether control of masters, royalty rate, distribution autonomy, or marketing leverage, he ended the 1996 to 2001 period in a stronger position than any country artist before him had ever finished a major label deal. The cost to Capitol Nashville was 3 division presidents, an EMI restructuring, and an 18-month creative project that the public still remembers as an embarrassment. The guy at the record fair in Memphis was still holding the Chris Gaines CD when I started thinking about how the story actually went. He'd called it the moment Garth Brooks lost his mind. He'd repeated, almost verbatim, the framing that had been printed in trade magazines 25 years earlier, the framing that had been useful to Capitol Nashville because it kept the focus on creative experimentation rather than on contract restructuring. I bought the album. $2. He laughed again as he rang it up. The Chris Gaines record isn't a curiosity of a confused superstar. It's a contractual artifact of one of the most disciplined leverage campaigns in country music history, delivered in costume, marketed at the label's expense, and counted against an album delivery clause that the artist used to time his own departure. The man at the booth was holding the document. He didn't recognize it. The conventional wisdom about Garth Brooks and Capitol Records will probably never change. It's too convenient and it's too quiet. The numbers say something else.